glutamine. It's probably one of my all-time favorites. It was explained to me by a sports scientist as you being the glue, to muscle tissue. Glutamine kind of sits there and stitches things back up. And so, yeah, typically people would notice that too from a recovery standpoint.
Hi, Coach Mike Ritchie here for the D3 Multisport podcast. And on this week's podcast, we have nutritionist Craig David. Craig has been a great resource for D3 Multisport since 2008, 2009, when he owned a nutrition store here in Boulder called Max Muscle Nutrition. And Craig has a degree in sports nutrition and physiology from Colorado State University, which is renowned for that degree. And he's very, very knowledgeable. We dive into meal timing and branched chain amino acids and some of the things that, we may not talk about often, but a key for recovery, obviously for endurance athletes to, maximize their efforts. And you can do all the training you want, but if you're not, maximizing obviously the sleep and then the nutrition, it becomes more of an uphill battle. But I'm sure you'll get some valuable information out of this podcast. And if you enjoy it, please give it a like, follow us, and share it with a friend. Thank you. Coach Mike here this week. I have sports nutritionist Craig David on with us. Craig and I have been friends for a long time. He helped me with a couple of Ironman races and a lot of my athletes through D3 Multisport. He actually used to own a Max Muscle here in Boulder. And it's great to have you on, Greg. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Mike, you bet, man. It's fun to be here. I've listened to several of your past episodes and still love following the D3 team and crew and seeing what's going on. So yeah, it's cool to jump back in and chat.
That's awesome. And we're always talking nutrition, sending texts back and forth, or just conversations on rides, or when we're strength training and all that stuff. It's always at the forefront of how we think. And beyond sleep, it's probably the most important thing in terms of performance, besides the actual, getting the workouts in, which we assume people do.
Sure.
Yeah. What's let's just go back a little bit. What's your background in, I believe you went to CSU and you got a nutrition degree from there. Is that right?
Yeah, you bet. No, good memory. Yeah. So way back, it's been a couple decades at this point. But yeah, attended CSU, actually dual majored in both human physiology and nutrition. So yeah, it was kind of, the programs allowed you to pair it up. But yeah, it was one of those things where you found the personal passion in it, right? And just
what a great combo.
What I always, yeah, exactly. And I just also, and I still have an appreciation for, but I really came to learn it then, and how quickly the body can change with nutrition, manipulation, right? Or positive influence. And so that's kind of what really geared me into it. Jumping into, the realm with sports nutrition and supplementation with Max Muscle, and dabbling in some triathlon and trail running and powerlifting and now mountain biking. So
yeah,
the evolution continues.
Right. So going back to CSU, when you were there, you had Professor Cordain, who actually wrote the first paleo book, right? So that's
right.
Was he, what kind of professor was he? Was he interesting? Did he give you things to think about and start thinking about, more natural foods versus what, mid 70s, we started adding all this crap into our foods, right? And I'm sure this is a guy who was anti-processed stuff and probably more about go eat a chicken and an avocado and have an apple, right?
There you go. Everybody had one of those in class. Chicken, rotisserie chicken, and avocado.
I love it.
Yeah, again, just thinking back to those times, you're right. He never really pushed, the book and per se, hey, if you're not going paleo, you're not doing it right. But yeah, it's your point about whole foods, right? I think that was very much his holistic approach to at the core of nutrition. It's about managing, your micronutrients, all the vitamins and minerals that we get from foods, which we are missing, right? And in a real big way in the typical diet, and balancing that out with kind of our macro needs, right? Our carbohydrates, our fats, and our proteins. So I think that was honestly, to give him, credit, right, is understanding back to that power of nutrition and just the swift influence it has, right? From the basics of cardiovascular disease to inflammation, all the way into how does that then set you up for this idea of performing better, right, in sport and life. But yeah, I think he had a real good perspective of just slowing down and like really understanding, you kind of are what you eat, right? The power of food. So yeah, certainly phenomenal lessons and great springboard.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard a great quote yesterday, and it was, "You are consistently what you are, or you
Mhm.
are consistently what you're inconsistent at." Right? So if you're the person who
Sure.
says, "I'm going to eat well," and then you don't do it, then that's really what you are, right? So you're
Yeah,
inconsistent at
there you
eating
go.
well. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So going back to the macronutrients, and micronutrients, you've obviously worked with a lot of hundreds, maybe thousands of endurance athletes. Do you feel like
Yeah.
there was a good knowledge there when you worked with them, and they were? I know triathletes in general have super want to absorb every morsel of information they can.
Yeah, I would say
But
so.
did you feel like they knew what they were missing, or you kind of had to point out like, hey, look, we're missing all these BCAAs and all kinds of things that, this will ramp up your performance by just taking in, a supplement, right?
Sure, sure. That's a really good question. I haven't really thought of it in that context. Thinking back, I would say it was a mixed bag, right? I think there's a lot of people that understand the information or at least know it, right? But then implementation and timing, which is a large part of what I worked on in that piece of my career, is timing can really be critical, right? Whether that's going into training, coming out of it, throughout the day, etc. I mean, your body's managing all these different metabolic processes at different times. So I think that was probably the biggest thing I recall is, timing not being as at the forefront of all this information, right? Because we, at least nowadays, it's you can buy any supplement under the sun, you can go grocery shopping, but then it's like, okay, what do you do now? Right. And I think that's where a lot of people like, well, do I eat the, celery and peanut butter before a workout? Or is that a better afternoon snack? And all those sorts of like easy things, but yeah, it can be confusing if you don't understand how those macronutrients work in our system.
Right.
So I
It's a
think
great
that's
point.
probably the biggest thing we focused on was breaking down, the roles of the macronutrients and how they further enhance, again, in this case, right, whatever the sport is, speeding up recovery and so on. But hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, no, that's good. So that's a great point. So let's just say we have an endurance athlete, and typically they're going to do 2 workouts a day. Sometimes it's 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week. A morning swim, an afternoon run, or whatever it is, a lift in the morning and a bike ride in the afternoon. How, what is your feeling on? Okay, so I do my swim at 6. I'm done at 7. Like, what is my time frame in there to get some nutrients in, so I'm actually going to help replenish all that glycogen I just lost? Because you hear all different kinds of things. You hear an hour, you hear 30 minutes, you hear 20 minutes. If you don't do, at
Sure.
19 minutes and 59 seconds, you're totally hosed if you don't have something in your system. I mean, it's all kind of crazy. But
Yeah.
what's your experience with that, and what has been the best time for that absorption?
Yeah, phenomenal question, right? And yeah, I think there's been a lot of people that have like really tried to figure that out with, thumb pricks and ear pricks in a moving car, like on a bike, trying to figure out, what what hormones are circulating when, right? From my experience, I think I always try to go down or back to and simplify it on the level of like, okay, what's happening, post workout, right? Well, your heart rate's been up, your blood pressure's been up. That also means cortisol has been really high because it's been breaking down all this energy, right? So, yeah, within 19 minutes, right, depending on the workout, is your body coming back to baseline? It may or may not be, right? Again, it's very dependent. Um, Based on my experience, both personally, but if you look at all the research, like those hormones don't just flip immediately, and that's a progression, right? It didn't take you, or excuse me, it takes you time to go from zone 1 to zone 4, right? There's a progression there in your workout and how your body gets revved up and is ultimately most efficient. So that process also has to come back down. I think understanding, the role of cortisol and insulin both. Without insulin, you're not going to recover, right? You're not going to have the glycogen reload. So in terms of timing, I think all the way up into an hour, you're doing really good, right? Everybody's body responds differently. Some people just don't have the stomach for it after some intense workouts. So you've got to think about that. You've got to think about hydration level. We all know that the gut's going to absorb better when there's a more equal balance of fluid and food. So to answer your question directly, I think if you're within an hour, you're doing really good. Obviously, I would say probably the shorter the better, but you're safe there, right? Your body's not going to all of a sudden start breaking down muscle just because you've had to wait, a little bit, right? If you're an athlete in the morning, you're probably getting ready for your day. Let's face it, life still happens. So, but yeah, that's where your recovery protocol obviously helps simplify that as well, so you don't have to think about it as much.
And do you feel like there's a certain number? So if I'm a 90, kilogram athlete, am I going for 2 grams, 1 gram, on that recovery workout? Am I looking for, they always say, the whey protein, the scoops are always 20 grams or 30 grams a scoop. And that seems to be the average number. But if you're a lighter athlete, right? So if I'm a, 120 pound female, maybe I don't need 30 grams of protein. Maybe I'm fine with 15 or 20, right? So is there a set number that says, if I weigh X, it's 1.2 per grams of body weight or something like that? Like, what's that number?
Mm-hmm.
Would you?
Yeah, another really good question, right? Variable to a degree, but I think, whether it's the lighter female to the heavier male or anywhere in between, if you look at your body weight times, 0.7, 0.8, all the way up to 0.9, if you're really like, say, an intense training block, then again, you're doing really good. And we always would just advise in the past, like whatever that number is, just try to spread it out evenly, right? There's no sense in jamming it all in 1 or 2 meals because the body's still, it's just not going to be efficient, right? When it comes to processing.
Right.
So yeah, if that's, let's just say that works out to be 20 grams, in 4 or 5 meals, then yeah, if you're getting that 15 to 20 grams, post workout, then great, right? You give your body time to really manage it and just stay. I think more than anything, consistency, right? The body is a machine and it's always operating, whether it's trying to downregulate from a day or upregulate for a workout. It's smart, right? I think it's smarter than we give it credit for.
Yeah, you mentioned consistency, and I will say when I worked with you, the one thing you talked to me about was just because it's a recovery workout doesn't mean I cut back calories, which from a common sense standpoint or a logical standpoint, I think about, but it's probably, counterintuitive to what we think, right? So if you had someone who's, let's say they're training 15 hours a week, they're averaging 2 hours a day, would you say that they're better off taking in those 3,000 calories every day, or you still believe in the fact that it shouldn't be 1,500 one day and 3,500 the next and 2,000 the next and back up to 3,000? So you're more of the mindset that it should be even across the board. I mean, obviously a heavier day, you're probably going to eat a little more, but you're not going to go from 3,000 to 8,000 unless you're doing some super, super long event. But that totally. Range of 2,500 to 4,000 is probably where that 150 to 180 pound athlete probably lives, training 15 hours a week, right? So what's the reason, for keeping the calories consistent across the board, just so the body is consistent with breaking it down, or is there another reason?
I think that's certainly part of it, right? And I think the other school of thought that I kind of tended to, subscribe to is the fact that, we're our basal, right, our baseline metabolic rate is relatively stable. Let's think back, to the bike ride last week, 42 miles in 4 hours. I think I burned 2,600 calories. The ability to obviously take in that much food in that time frame is pretty minimal. But did we eat some extra to make up from that? Sure. But in terms of cutting that off, or I should not cutting it off, but taking in less the next day, you're really putting your body in a potential situation of a deficit because of everything that happened prior the day before, right? And one thing we always talked about is like recovery cycles. So, if you train hard on Friday, you're really not truly, your system's not truly rebalancing until, 24, even 48 hours later. So if you're down regulating calories when your body's trying to rebuild, again, I think this is where you see athletes get caught up in those cycles of, well, I didn't train that hard, but I don't have any energy, right? Or I went out and hit it really hard and I recovered fine, but I'm not sleeping, and the injury's not subsiding, right? I'm not making progress. Well, it's still part of that. Without that recovery cycle, it doesn't matter, right? So I think if an athlete can really understand, okay, where's my kind of balance point, and if I have a smaller, call it standard deviation from there, then ultimately they're still going to win, right? Because they've got a very consistent flow of nutrients that their body really needs. So
Yeah, it makes sense. So you talk about, 2,400 calories last week on a long ride, 4 hours, gravel, not super fast, into the wind, a little bit of warmer weather than we're used to, all that. So,
yeah,
out of those 2,400 calories, I mean, obviously you can't replace all of them anyway, but they weren't all
yep.
glycogen either, right? So there's a huge piece of that that's fat, and that comes into play as well.
It does. Say that last part again, real quick.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that you burn 2,400 calories, but it wasn't all glycogen, right? Like a big piece of that has to be fat. A big percentage of that,
Sure.
maybe 60% to a point, right? Until we're, pushing really hard up hills and kind of going a bit, not anaerobic, but high end aerobic, obviously, more of that tempo. So
Yeah,
some of
yeah, you would
that's
hope
fat,
so, right?
right?
I mean, I
So
think,
what's that?
as long as you're, and then this is, I would say absolutely, as long as you're um, in those zones, right, that are really going to optimize your body's ability to burn fat, then yeah, and that's the other balance too, right? Is definitely not overeating while training, because then we get obviously the gut distress. But I think there's something to be said about, and this is something I'm still learning as a aging athlete, but there's certainly something to be said about just allowing your body to burn its own calories, right? And knowing that it's okay. Like, you want to stay hydrated, keep the electrolytes in, but if it's a recovery ride or a, let's call it 90 minutes or less ride, you probably don't need to slam 200 calories or 300 calories before you go out and do that workout. Again, assuming you've got some training under your belt and there's some, know-how there. I think we can, as we get older, there's certainly a way to help our bodies do that easier.
Right. So let's just switch gears for a second. So we talk about endurance athletes, but let's take that endurance athlete, let's put them in the gym. And they're going to
Sure.
do, let's say they're going to do a heavy day of, deadlifts and squats and bench press and, some heavier weight that's, certainly more stressful, maybe as stressful
Mhm.
as running 400s on the track, but in a different way, right? It's because lifting is completely anaerobic, right? There's nothing aerobic about lifting weights. That contraction is always anaerobic. So if I'm in the gym for 30 minutes, am I gonna refuel differently, or am I looking to increase that protein for that recovery? And does the timing matter, or is it still the same where I'm good for an hour? What's your thought? What are your
Mhm.
thoughts on that?
I think that really comes down to like the end goal, right? Are we, maintaining, right? Are we trying to add a little lean mass in the off season? I think timing, yeah. If you're in that 20 minutes to an hour afterwards, again, your body still has to go through those changes. Um, if it's, I think here's the interesting thing, right? We saw with leaner athletes, right? They have a harder time maintaining muscle, or can, right? If the volume's high. So therefore, well, their nutrient mix, right? Their protein content, per kilogram or per pound may actually need to be higher. Um, somebody like myself, I have to be really careful, like, lifting, because yeah, I can just kind of really bulk up, but then it adds the fat as well. So for me, it's a higher protein and a lower carbohydrate. But if you're going to double up workouts that day, it may actually be your baseline protein, but a higher carbohydrates really ensure that glycogen's there. So I think those are all, and I know you guys focus on that well, is really, for the athletes listening in, like getting really familiar with how your body feels, right? And how it's dealing with your recovery nutrition. Are you eating before bed and training in the morning? Whatever that looks like, but really getting in tune with that, I think, is one big thing we saw in the past that if people just slow down just a bit, feel it out and communicate it with you, right? Like, this is how I felt in this training session when I had a peanut butter and jelly before bed. Maybe they had the best workout ever. And
Right.
that tells you a couple of things, right? They were
Right.
probably super low on glycogen previously. And maybe they just didn't have a good sleep cycle. There's all kinds of things. But
Yeah, I always think it's the not enough protein if you're hungry before bed. Like it's
sure.
always that, especially if you're going for those carbs like the jelly and the bread and a little bit of peanut butter. Obviously, there's some protein in there, but I'm always thinking it's people tell me they're eating before bed. I'm like, oh, that's protein, right? That's kind of what I think.
Yeah.
So you hit on all these things. And another question I have for you is in terms of like hydration and water, and in two respects, right? One, we have to move nutrients throughout the body. We need the water. You need to be hydrated to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, what role do you think the hydration plays on a daily basis in terms of recovery? Like, is a dehydrated athlete not going to be able to recover as well as somebody who stays on top of their hydration? Is that an easy answer? Yes, or it could be just depends.
That is a phenomenal question. uh, I mean, I do think the easy answer is sure. Like, we're, from a circulation standpoint, right? Let's start there. We know the body is circulating our blood supply roughly 6 to 8 times a day. If we're athletes training, is it more frequently because we're moving metabolic waste, we're transporting all these other things. So yeah, I think particularly with us athletes that live at, an elevation or a higher elevation above sea level, then yeah, I would say the easy answer is yes, more often than not. And people that have, digestion issues, right? Maybe that's something to think about, right? Is your ongoing hydration. I know there's people that just don't drink, and I get it. I understand that that's a thing. I think it's also harder to like contemplate and explain that from the other side. That like, well, why wouldn't you want to drink water, like, or an iced tea, or that one I do have a hard time with because I think it's knowing how fluids impact the body. It is kind of a question mark of, yeah, why wouldn't you want to just be hydrated on an ongoing basis? It's not a great answer to your question, but
Right. No, it makes sense. Makes sense. Do you so just going back to the endurance athlete again, do you feel like there's any one supplement that everybody should be taking, whether it's creatine or some kind of protein source, or we used a lot of glutamine. We worked together when you have max muscle, so a lot of different things I think that really helped with recovery. Is there one thing now that you look at and you say, I got to have this on a daily basis? It helps me recover, feel stronger.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I would. Let's remove me for the equation for a second.
Yeah,
But
sure,
yeah,
sure.
if you if you look at the core of what the body can produce and what it can't, meaning external sources it has to intake, right, in order to function. Your essential fats, right, your EFAs, your fish oils. You can even do your plant-based primrose, borage oil, etc. That's definitely a key one. There's all kinds of cognitive proof, right? Internal GI support to our joints, right? Some of the big ones. I'd also go to our amino acids, right? Our body cannot make amino acids, right? It can break down proteins and resynthesize some of them, but we have to ingest. That's why it's so easy to lose muscle mass, is because it's constantly being broken down. So yeah, amino acids are just a simpler form of the protein, hopefully in a higher concentration to speed up that recovery piece. And then, yeah, you mentioned it, glutamine. It's probably one of my all-time favorites. It was explained to me by a sports scientist as you being the glue, to muscle tissue. Glutamine kind of sits there and stitches things back up. And so, yeah, typically people would notice that too from a recovery standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And it's again super safe, right? You can't really overdose on it, so to speak. And the other one, I think, just more recently that has had more traction is really the idea of adaptogens, right? And how our body handles stress in its current state, acute versus chronic, and the ability to handle a higher level of stress or training load while having a more moderated response. There's all kinds of those, lion's mane and ashwagandha and rhodiola and etc. So those are fascinating. I think they're still in their early stages. But yeah, there's something to be said that if you can decrease your overall stress response, which goes back to cortisol, then guess what? That means more access to fuels, right? That means less overall physiological stress on our nervous system. That's a whole nother that's a Huberman Lab podcast right there. So
Do you feel like in terms of the branched chain amino acids, is there any supplement you recommend that you use that you like?
for those specifically,
Yeah.
oh, I just usually get the plain old regular unflavored BCAAs and
Throw it
dump
in
them
some
in the
juice or something?
recovery. Yeah, or juice, something to, yeah, exactly. Amino acids in their natural, or I should say, denatured state are very heavy, right? That's just the way they are
Yep.
molecularly. So yeah, they need to be mixed with something for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot for 3 questions. And I know we didn't talk about this, but I'm going to throw this at you. All right. Favorite interval workout? What is it? Favorite high intensity workout? Endurance workout, not strength training.
Yeah, I'd say recently getting ready for Leadville, these ladder workouts, these sprint workouts, these intervals are rocking my world in a
Like
good
30
way.
second, 45-second, minute and a half, 2 minutes and back down again.
That's the one. As
Okay.
grueling as it is, it's like, okay, I did the first set. Let's get the second one. Okay, the third one, this hurts so good, but I'm gonna finish, right?
And you're just hanging on for dear life.
Yeah, there's something about those numbers as they get bigger. You're like, okay, I'm gonna get this one. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome.
really, it may be a little, there may be some irony in the fact that I have enjoyed this. So,
Well, those are all those short little hills you got to go up, right? 20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. All right. Favorite
absolutely.
exercise in the gym?
Oh, favorite exercise in the gym. Man, I'm kind of a sucker for a good front squat. I don't know. Yeah, front squat and a deadlift all day long.
So
All day
what
long.
is it about the front squat? I mean, that weight's in the front, it's super heavy, loading the quads.
Yeah, I think it's just like you're totally dialed in, right? You can't think about anything else. Like, yeah, you're balancing up front, the weight's in your heels,
Can't
your
fake it.
cores. Yeah, oh totally. Yeah, you cannot fake it, man.
Awesome, awesome. All right.
Yeah.
What's your favorite recovery food?
Favorite recovery food. Some may, give me a hard time about this, but two things. I love to put peanut butter in my recovery shake.
Okay.
I still think there's something to be said for slowing down nutrient absorption with fat,
Yeah.
or I just like peanut butter, one of the two. But also ice cream. Ice cream in your recovery shake, I mean, you just get this major glycogen punch, and when you're depleted, man, and you 20 to 30 minutes after you down that shake, you just feel like you're on top of a mountain, right?
It's
Your legs are
awesome.
tingling, but your brain's like in this state of euphoria, like, I just had this great workout and I just satisfied my taste buds like no other.
I love
So
it. I love it. All right.
go,
Well, this is
go.
great.
Yeah,
Thanks for coming on, and I'm sure we'll have you on again, and maybe we'll check in on the Leadville training at some point and see how that's going.
love
And
to. Yeah, that's a ride for sure, literally and
that's right for
figuratively.
sure. All right. Well, thanks again. Appreciate it coming
Well,
on.
thanks for the time, Mike.
All right. You bet. Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Trust the Process. If you have a question on anything related to triathlon, please send me an email at mike@d3multisport.com. We'd love to hear from you. Make it a great day.